On Christmas Eve, my son told me, "You'll just ruin the vibe. Don't come to dinner." So I stayed home alone, heartbroken and humiliated. But 3 hours later, when the police showed up at my door, my son's world came crashing down. He had no idea what I had found out about him. You won't believe how this Christmas Eve ended. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The blue glow of my phone screen illuminated my face as I sat alone in my recliner. The house eerily quiet for Christmas Eve. Outside, snow fell softly against the windows of the home Margaret and I had shared for 37 years. Inside, the silence felt deafening. I scrolled through security camera footage from this morning, my arthritic fingers moving slowly across the screen. At 67, technology still felt foreign, but I'd mastered this app out of necessity. What I was about to discover would make every frustrating tutorial worth it. The timestamp read 9:47 a.m. when my son Danny appeared on camera, storming up the front walkway with that familiar scowl etched across his face. Even through the grainy footage, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the aggressive set of his jaw. I knew that look. It meant trouble. I pressed play and watched myself answer the door, my gray hair disheveled from sleep, still wearing the ratty bathrobe Margaret used to tease me about. God, I miss her voice telling me to put on something decent when unexpected visitors arrived. "We need to talk." Danny's voice crackled through the phone's tiny speaker. I remembered that conversation with perfect clarity. How could I forget? It was a moment 35 years of devoted fatherhood crumbled before my eyes. I'd invited him in, offered coffee, asked about his Christmas plans. Standard father-son pleasantries. But Danny had come with an agenda. "Look, Dad, about tonight's dinner." He'd started, pacing my living room like a caged animal. "It's not happening here." My heart had sunk. I'd spent 3 days preparing Margaret's famous prime rib recipe, setting the good china, polishing the silver she'd inherited from her mother. 12 family members were supposed to gather around our dining room table, just like we had for decades. "What do you mean?" I'd asked, though something in his tone already told me I wouldn't like the answer. We moved it to Amber's place. Her apartment's more central. Danny couldn't even look me in the eye when he lied. But I've already prepared everything. The food, Dad, just stop. Danny's voice had turned sharp, cutting. "You'll just ruin the vibe with your constant health complaints and that depressing widower act you've been pulling. Don't come. Everyone agrees you're just too much to deal with right now." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd felt my blood sugar spike, that familiar dizzy sensation that came with my diabetes when stress hit. 3 years since Margaret's death, and I was still learning to manage it alone. Depressing? I'd whispered. "Yeah, depressing. All you do is talk about Mom being gone and your stupid diabetes and how lonely you are. It's exhausting, Dad. We want to actually enjoy Christmas, not spend it walking on eggshells around your feelings." I watched the security footage of myself standing there, mouth slightly open, looking every bit the pathetic old man Danny was describing. But something flickered across my face that I hadn't noticed in the moment. A calculating look, there and gone in an instant. "The family agrees with you?" I'd ask quietly. "Carol thinks you need professional help. Tommy says you've been acting weird lately. Everyone's worried about your mental state." Danny had delivered this crushing blow with casual cruelty. "Maybe it's time you face reality. You're not the same guy you used to be." That's when he'd really twisted the knife. "You're embarrassing, Dad. Calling everyone constantly, showing up uninvited, acting all needy and pathetic. We can't keep pretending everything's normal when you're clearly losing it." I paused the footage, remembering how those words had felt like ice water in my veins. My own son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid without complaint. Calling me pathetic. Embarrassing. But there was something Danny didn't know. Something he couldn't have anticipated as he delivered his cruel Christmas Eve ultimatum. I'd been watching him, not just a day, but for weeks. The security system I'd installed last month wasn't really about the break-ins I'd reported to the family. Those missing items, my prescription bottles, cash from my wallet, Margaret's jewelry, they hadn't been stolen by strangers prowling the neighborhood. As Danny had stormed out that morning, shouting over his shoulder that I should get some help and stop bothering people, I'd made a decision. It was time to check what my cameras had been recording. I'd spent the last 8 hours reviewing footage, and what I discovered made my son's cruelty seem almost quaint by comparison. Danny thought he was so clever, convincing the family I was losing my mind, isolating me from everyone who might question his version of events. He thought he'd successfully painted me as a confused, desperate old man who couldn't accept his wife's death or his own decline. He thought wrong. I scrolled forward in the footage to this afternoon's events. What I saw made my hands shake, not from age or illness, but from pure, cold rage. What I saw on that footage would change everything between us forever. 10 months ago, Danny had shown up at my door with a sob story and 2 duffel bags. His apartment lease had fallen through, he'd explained, and he just needed a few weeks to get back on his feet. Could he crash in the basement? Just temporarily, of course. You know how much this means to me, Dad, he'd said, pulling out that boyish smile that used to melt Margaret's heart. I'll pay rent as soon as the contracting jobs pick up. I should have seen the red flags then. Danny had never shown interest in construction work before, but grief makes you stupid. I was rattling around in this big house alone, jumping at every creaking floorboard, talking to Margaret's picture like she might answer back. The company seemed like a blessing. The basement had everything he needed. A full bathroom, kitchenette, separate entrance. Margaret and I had finished it years ago, dreaming it might house grandchildren during visits. Instead, it became Danny's personal headquarters for activities I was only beginning to understand. 3 weeks became 3 months. 3 months became permanent. The business loan request came in month 4. Danny cornered me in the kitchen one morning, spreading official-looking papers across Margaret's dining table like he owned the place. This is huge, Dad. A commercial renovation project worth 6 figures. I just need $35,000 to buy materials up front. Then I'll pay you back with interest when the client pays. The papers look legitimate enough. Contracts, supplier quotes, timeline projections. Danny had always been good with computers, better than me with technology. I'd signed the check thinking I was investing in my son's future. That was 7 months ago. Not a penny repaid. Not even an acknowledgement that the debt existed when I gently brought it up. Don't worry about that right now, Dad. Business is complicated. You wouldn't understand the cash flow issues. The strangers started appearing around month 6. Rough-looking men who parked beat-up cars in my driveway and disappeared into the basement through Danny's private entrance. They came at odd hours, 2 a.m., dawn middle of weekday afternoons when decent people were at work. When I'd asked Danny about his business associates, he'd gotten defensive. They're subcontractors, Dad. Construction guys. They're not going to look like Wall Street bankers. But these men didn't carry toolboxes. They carried backpacks and gym bags, stayed for 20 minutes, then left. Sometimes they'd argue loud enough for me to hear through the floor, though I could never make out words. The missing items started around the same time. At first, I blamed my memory. Diabetes can cause confusion, and grief had left me scattered. When Margaret's pearl earrings disappeared from her jewelry box, I figured I'd misplaced them during one of my nostalgic evening visits to our bedroom. Then my prescription bottles started coming up short. The diabetes medication that should have lasted 30 days was empty after 3 weeks. Blood pressure pills vanished entirely. When I mentioned it to Danny, he'd shrugged. Maybe you should get one of those pill organizers. Dad, you're probably double dosing and forgetting. The cash was harder to dismiss. I kept emergency money in my desk drawer. $500 in 20s, the same amount Margaret had insisted we maintain for decades. The money disappeared in increments. First 50, then 100, until the envelope held nothing but Margaret's handwritten note. Emergency fund. Do not spend except for true emergencies. Even that note felt like mockery now. Danny's attitude shifted as the months passed. The grateful son became demanding. The temporary guest became entitled landlord. He'd blast music in the basement at all hours, invite people over without asking, leave beer bottles scattered around my backyard after late-night gatherings. When I'd complained, he'd turn it back on me. You're being dramatic, Dad. You're turning into one of those cranky old men who complains about everything. Mom wouldn't have nagged me like this. That hurt worst of all, using Margaret's memory as a weapon against me. The family manipulation was masterful, I had to admit. Danny positioned himself as a concerned son dealing with a declining father. Phone calls to my sister Carol painted me as increasingly unstable. He called me 3 times yesterday about the same conversation. I'd overheard him telling her during one of his basement phone sessions. He's repeating stories, forgetting things we discussed. I'm worried about his mental state. Carol started calling with that careful, therapeutic tone people use with mental patients. My nephew Tommy began speaking slowly and loudly, as if I'd gone deaf along with senile. Family gatherings became exercises in humiliation, as everyone watched me with pitying concern. How are you feeling, Uncle Frank? Are you taking your medication? Dad seems confused about what day it is. Maybe we should look into some help for him. Danny orchestrated it all with surgical precision. Every family member heard carefully curated stories about my supposed decline. My independence, my dignity, my reputation, all systematically demolished by the son I'd raised to be better than this. But Danny had made one crucial mistake in his campaign, to paint me as a confused old fool. He'd underestimated me. While he was busy telling everyone about my failing memory and declining judgment, I was quietly adapting to life without Margaret, learning new skills, becoming more observant, paying attention to details that might have escaped me when I had a partner to share the mental load. The security cameras were just the beginning, but I had one card left to play that they didn't know about. The decision to install security cameras came after Margaret's wedding ring disappeared from my nightstand. That was my breaking point. I'd been making excuses for missing cash and prescription pills, but her ring? That was sacred territory. We've had some break-ins in the neighborhood. I'd told Danny when the installation crew arrived. Better safe than sorry. Danny had barely looked up from his phone. Whatever makes you feel safer, Dad. Though maybe you just misplaced stuff. Happens when you get older. The installer, a patient young man named Miguel, spent 3 hours teaching me the smartphone app. At 67, I'd never been comfortable with technology. Margaret had handled our computer needs. But losing her meant learning everything she used to manage, and I was more capable than my family gave me credit for. See, Mr. Hartwell? Just tap here to view live footage, and here to review recordings. The system saves everything for 30 days automatically. I felt genuinely proud mastering those controls. Each successful login, every smooth camera angle adjustment, proved I wasn't the declining old man Danny described to everyone. My mind was sharp. I was adapting, learning. The first week of footage was mundane comfort. Delivery drivers dropping packages, neighbors walking dogs, the mail carrier's daily routine. Watching normal life unfold around my property felt reassuring after months of feeling violated by mysterious disappearances. Then came the revelation that changed everything. I was reviewing footage from a Tuesday afternoon, learning to navigate the timeline controls, when I spotted movement at Danny's basement entrance. The timestamp read 2:17 p.m., middle of a workday, when legitimate contractors would be on job sites. 3 men emerged from a battered sedan. Not the kind of people you'd expect at a suburban home in broad daylight. They wore dark clothing, moved with predatory awareness, constantly scanning the neighborhood like they expected trouble. The audio pickup was surprisingly clear. As they approached Danny's door, I heard fragments of conversation. Make this quick. Old man upstairs. Danny better have our... The rest was lost as they disappeared inside, but I'd heard enough. These weren't subcontractors. These were dangerous men conducting business that required secrecy and speed. I scrolled through more footage, searching for patterns. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Danny's business associates came and went like clockwork. Different faces, same energy, same furtive movements, same careful timing to avoid my upstairs activities. They never stayed long, 20 minutes maximum, but their visits followed a schedule Danny had clearly coordinated around my routines. Doctor's appointments, grocery runs, visits to Margaret's grave. Danny knew my schedule better than I'd realized. He'd been using my predictable absence to conduct whatever illegal business was funding his lifestyle in my basement. The most damning footage came from a Thursday evening when I'd supposedly been confused about our dinner plans. According to Danny's story, told to Carol with great concern, I'd insisted we'd scheduled dinner when we hadn't, then gotten agitated when he corrected me. The security footage told a different story. Danny had invited two men over at 7 p.m., exactly when he knew I'd be waiting for him upstairs. I watched myself on camera, looking pathetic in my good shirt, checking the clock every few minutes. Meanwhile, Danny was conducting business 20 feet below, treating my home like his personal office. When I'd finally gone downstairs to ask about dinner, Danny had acted annoyed and confused. "Dad, we never made dinner plans. Are you feeling okay? You seem really mixed up lately." But the cameras showed the truth. Two strangers had hidden in the basement bathroom, while Danny gaslit me into believing I'd imagined our conversation. I'd gone to bed that night questioning my own memory, while Danny resumed his meeting the moment I was out of sight. That's when I understood the full scope of his manipulation. Every story about my declining mental state corresponded to evenings when Danny needed me distracted or discredited. Every concerned family call happened after Danny had scheduled business that required privacy. My supposed confusion always aligned perfectly with his operational needs. The Christmas party revelation hit me like a physical blow. I was reviewing footage from last week when I discovered Danny and Carol's phone conversation in my own backyard. They thought they were being discreet, talking by the garden shed where I couldn't hear from inside. But my cameras picked up everything. "He's getting worse, Carol. Yesterday, he accused me of stealing Mom's jewelry. His paranoia is really escalating. Maybe it's time to discuss other living arrangements," Carol had replied. "This house is too big for him anyway." I've been thinking the same thing. Christmas dinner might be too much stress for him this year. All those people trying to keep track of conversations. We could have it at my place. Or maybe Amber's apartment. Somewhere smaller, calmer. Perfect. I'll handle telling him. Make it seem like it's for his own good. I watched this conspiracy unfold on my own property, my own son and sister planning my social isolation for Christmas. Not out of genuine concern, but to accommodate Danny's need for an empty house during the holidays. They thought they were so clever, managing the crazy old man who couldn't tell reality from delusion. They had no idea I was documenting every lie, every manipulation, every calculated cruelty. But I knew their secret. I knew exactly what Danny was running from my basement, and I had 30 days of video evidence to prove it. After Danny's brutal departure that morning, I'd sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour. The echo of his words, pathetic, embarrassing, depressing, rang in my ears like a death knell for our relationship. But something nagged at me beyond the emotional devastation. His timing seemed too convenient, too calculated. Christmas Eve morning, the one day when legitimate businesses were closed, when normal people were with family, when the neighborhood would be quiet and distracted. Perfect cover for activities that require privacy. I opened the security app with trembling fingers, scrolling back to 10:15 a.m., just 28 minutes after Danny had stormed out of my living room. What I saw made my chest tighten with a mixture of rage and vindication. 3 men approached Danny's basement entrance with the casual confidence of regular visitors. But these weren't the usual rough characters I'd grown accustomed to seeing. These men wore expensive coats, moved with the calculated precision of people who made their living from other people's desperation. The leader, a tall man with graying temples, carried a leather briefcase that looked distinctly out of place in my suburban backyard. His companions flanked him like bodyguards, constantly scanning the area with professional wariness. Danny met them at the door, and even through the grainy footage, I could see his nervous energy. His usual arrogant posture was replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like fear. The audio pickup caught fragments of their conversation as they moved toward the basement entrance. Christmas Eve deadline. Old man problem needs solving. Can't keep making excuses. My blood ran cold. They weren't talking about construction materials or legitimate business concerns. They were talking about me. I was the old man problem that needed solving. I watched them disappear into basement, then fast-forwarded to the timeline, looking for their exit. 47 minutes. Whatever business they conducted required nearly an hour of Danny's undivided attention. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. At 11:32 a.m., just after men had left, Danny made a trip to his car carrying two familiar items that made my heart stop: Margaret's jewelry box and my father's antique watch collection. I watched my son load my most precious possessions into his trunk like they were garage sale leftovers. Items that held decades of memories, irreplaceable pieces of family history, treated like disposable assets to fund whatever operation he was running from my basement. The jewelry box had been Margaret's grandmother's, passed down through 3 generations. Inside were pieces that told our love story: her engagement ring, anniversary gifts, the pearl necklace I'd given her for our 25th wedding anniversary. Danny was selling our history to strangers. My father's watches represented a different kind of legacy. Each piece had been carefully chosen, lovingly maintained, intended for Danny when I passed away. Now he was liquidating them while I was still alive, probably getting a fraction of their true value from whatever criminal network he'd entangled himself with. I scrolled further through the footage, finding more evidence of systematic theft. Multiple trips to his car throughout the week, carrying items I hadn't even realized were missing yet. My vintage camera equipment, Margaret's china set, even the silver letter opener my grandfather had carried in World War II. But the most damning evidence came from audio I'd initially missed. At 12:45 p.m., Danny made a phone call from his car, windows down, apparently believing he was beyond surveillance range. Yeah, it's done. The old fool bought the whole worried family routine. No, he won't be a problem tonight. Everyone thinks he's losing it anyway. Credit cards are max, but I can get more. His signature's easy to forge. Bank account should carry us through New Year's if we're careful. The pieces click together with horrible clarity. The move Christmas party wasn't about my supposed mental decline. It was about giving Danny unfettered access to conduct business in an empty house. The family's concern about my stability wasn't genuine worry. It was manufactured consensus designed to isolate me from potential allies. Danny hadn't just been stealing my possessions. He'd been using my identity for financial fraud, forging my signature, accessing accounts I didn't even know he could reach. The business loan was probably the tip of the iceberg. God only knew how much damage he'd done to my credit, my savings, my financial security. I sat back in my recliner, the phone heavy in my arthritic hands, processing the full scope of my son's betrayal. This wasn't just theft or drug dealing or whatever criminal enterprise he was operating. This was systematic destruction of everything I'd built, everything Margaret and I had worked for across 4 decades of marriage. The timing of his cruelty this morning wasn't coincidental. It was strategic. Drive me away from Christmas dinner, establish my emotional instability for the family, then use my empty house for his most important business meeting of the year. If they only knew what I found out about them. I could call the police right now. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. But something held me back, a cold calculation that surprised me with its clarity. Danny thought he'd won. He believed his manipulation had succeeded, that I was just a broken old man who'd accepted his exile gracefully. He had no idea I possessed the tools to destroy him completely. The question was timing. Strike now, or wait for the perfect moment when his victory would turn to ash in his mouth. I smiled for the first time in months. Danny was about to learn that underestimating your father could be a fatal mistake. The phone rang at 8:47 p.m., just as I was reviewing the most damaging footage for the 3rd time. Carol's name appeared on the caller ID, and I knew exactly why she was calling. Danny had undoubtedly instructed her to check on the confused old man who'd missed Christmas dinner. Frank? Honey, how are you holding up? Her voice carried that particular tone people use when talking children or invalids. Artificially bright, carefully controlled, dripping with manufactured concern. I made a split-second decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Oh, Carol, I'm a little confused, actually. I let my voice waver slightly, injected just enough uncertainty to sound genuinely disoriented. Wasn't I supposed to be somewhere tonight? The pause on her end was telling. I could practically hear her exchanging meaningful looks with whoever else was listening. Probably Danny, orchestrating this performance from Amber's apartment. "Oh, sweetie, we had Christmas dinner at Amber's place, remember? Danny thought it might be easier for everyone if we kept it small this year. You seem so stressed about hosting." Stressed about hosting? I'd been planning this dinner for weeks, had confirmed with everyone multiple times, but I played along with their revisionist history. I did. I don't. I had the prime rib ready and the table set. I let genuine confusion creep into my voice, though not about the facts they were claiming. "Frank, honey, you called me Tuesday saying you couldn't handle cooking for everyone this year. You said your diabetes was making you too tired, and you were worried about forgetting things." That was a complete fabrication. I'd never made such a call, never expressed any concerns about hosting. But apparently, this was a story Danny had constructed to justify their exile. "I don't remember calling you about that." This was absolutely true, and my genuine bewilderment sold the performance perfectly. "Oh, Frank." Carol's voice took on that patronizing sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Danny's been so worried about you. He says you've been making accusations, getting agitated about things that aren't really happening." "Accusations?" I prompted, curious to learn what version of events Danny had been spreading. "About people stealing from you, honey. Danny said you've been claiming someone took Margaret's jewelry and your medication, but he helped you look for everything, and it was all just misplaced." The audacity was breathtaking. Danny had stolen those items himself, then convinced my sister that my accurate accusations were signs of mental decline. He'd turned my legitimate complaints into evidence of his fabricated narrative. He also mentioned you've been calling family members repeatedly, asking the same questions over and over. Tommy said you called him 4 times last week about the same conversation. Another lie. I called Tommy once, asking if he'd heard from Danny about repaying the loan. Apparently, that single call had been transformed into evidence of obsessive behavior and memory loss. "Maybe I did," I said weakly, letting them think their gaslighting was working. "Everything feels so fuzzy lately. That's why we thought a quieter Christmas would be better for you, less overwhelming." Carol's explanation sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced this conversation. "Danny's been carrying such a heavy load, taking care of you and managing his business. He's exhausted, Frank." Taking care of me? The man who'd been systematically robbing me blind was being portrayed as my devoted caregiver. The criminal operating from my basement was somehow the victim of my declining mental state. Has he mentioned needing money for taking care of me? I ventured, fishing for information about the broader scope of his manipulation. Carol's hesitation was brief, but telling. "Well, he did mention that your medical expenses have been stressful, and he's been helping with household costs since he's staying there. How much has he asked for?" "Frank, you don't need to worry about money right now. Danny's handling everything. He just wants you to focus on getting better." But I pressed gently, playing a confused father who couldn't keep track of finances. "I just want to make sure I can pay him back. He borrowed a little from Tommy and me to help with your prescription costs and some home repairs. Nothing you need to worry about. Maybe $15,000 between us. He'll pay it back when his business picks up." $15,000. Danny had defrauded additional family members using my supposed medical needs as justification. Tommy and Carol had handed over money they believed was going toward my care, while Danny pocketed it for his criminal enterprise. "He's such a good son," I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. "He really is, Frank. That's why we all think. Well, maybe it's time to consider some additional help for you. Someone to assist with daily tasks, medication management, that sort of thing." There was the end game. Danny wasn't just stealing from me. He was positioning me for institutional care or guardianship, once I was declared incompetent. He had complete access to everything Margaret and I had built together. "You all think I need help?" I asked, injecting just the right amount of hurt confusion into my voice. "We love you, Frank. We just want you to be safe and comfortable. Danny's been researching some really nice assisted living communities." After I hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room, processing the full scope of Danny's manipulation. He'd poisoned every family relationship I had, turned my own sister into an unknowing accomplice in his fraud, and positioned himself as a long-suffering son dealing with a declining father. But they had no idea what I discovered 3 days earlier when I'd started digging deeper into Danny's activities. The security footage was damning, but it was just the beginning. What I discovered 3 days earlier changed everything. The next 3 hours transformed me from a grieving widower into a methodical investigator. Carol's condescending phone call had crystallized something cold and calculating in my chest. If my family wanted to treat me like a confused old man, I'd use their underestimation as a weapon. I started with a legal pad, the same kind Margaret had used for grocery lists and Christmas planning. Across the top, I wrote Danny's criminal enterprise in my careful accountant handwriting. Below that, I created columns: date, time, activity, witnesses, evidence, location. The security footage told a story more damning than I'd initially realized. Working backwards from Christmas Eve, I documented every suspicious visitor, every theft, every moment that exposed Danny's operation. The pattern was meticulous, professional, and absolutely devastating. November 15th, 2:30 p.m. Danny removed my coin collection from the den while I was at my diabetes appointment. Market value, approximately $8,000. He'd waited until exactly 30 minutes after I'd left, suggesting he'd been monitoring my schedule for weeks. November 22nd, 6:45 a.m. 3 men arrived carrying duffel bags, left with briefcases. Audio pickup caught fragments about weekly numbers and territory expansion. This wasn't small-time theft. Danny was operating a significant criminal business from my property. December 3rd, 4:15 p.m., Danny and his girlfriend Amber loaded my grandmother's antique furniture into a rental truck. I'd been searching for those pieces for weeks, assuming I'd misplaced them during one of my confused episodes. The footage showed Amber directing the operation while Danny provided muscle. That's when I realized Amber wasn't just Danny's romantic partner. She was his business manager. I'd only met her twice, both times briefly when she'd emerged from the basement looking disheveled and avoiding eye contact. Danny had described her as shy and not great with older people. Now I understood her avoidance differently. She'd been cataloging my possessions, identifying the most valuable items for systematic theft. The audio from December 10th confirmed my suspicions. Amber's voice, clearer than I'd heard it before, discussing my financial vulnerability with clinical precision. The old man's pension deposits are predictable. First Tuesday of every month, $3,200 after taxes, plus the Social Security, $1,800 monthly. His savings account shows consistent patterns. She had been accessing my financial information. Somehow, they'd obtained enough personal data to monitor my banking, track my income, plan their theft around my cash flow. But the most damning evidence emerged from footage I'd almost overlooked. December 18th, 1:20 p.m., while I'd been visiting Margaret's grave for our anniversary. Danny had brought someone new to the basement, a nervous man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase full of documents. The audio quality was exceptional that day, probably because they'd left the basement door partially open, overconfident in their privacy. The power of attorney forms are perfect. The suited man was saying, "Your father's signature matches exactly. No one will question these if the medical evaluation supports diminished capacity. And you can guarantee the evaluation will go our way?" Danny's voice carried an edge of anxiety I'd never heard before. "Dr. Morrison owes me favors. One session, a few carefully worded questions about confusion and memory loss, and we'll have everything we need to declare him incompetent." I'd pause the recording, replaying that conversation 3 times to ensure I'd heard correctly. Danny wasn't just stealing my possessions. He was forging legal documents to seize control of my entire estate. The power of attorney papers would give him access to everything: my bank accounts, investment portfolio, the house deed, even my medical decisions. The medical evaluation was clearly rigged. Dr. Morrison, whoever he was, would provide fraudulent documentation of mental decline to support Danny's guardianship petition. Once the courts accepted that paperwork, I'd become a legal non-person, completely dependent on my son's care. I spent the next hour screenshotting every crucial frame: saving audio clips to separate files, creating a digital evidence folder that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Each piece built on the others, creating an unbreakable chain of documentation. The financial crimes alone were staggering. Beyond the obvious theft, I'd found evidence of forged checks, unauthorized credit card usage, and fraudulent loan applications using my identity as collateral. Danny had opened 3 credit cards in my name, maxed them out, then reported me as confused about finances when I questioned unfamiliar charges. The timeline showed escalating boldness. Early thefts had been subtle, small amounts of cash, individual pieces of jewelry. But as Danny's confidence grew, so did the scope of his crimes. He'd been testing my awareness, discovering how much he could steal before I noticed or complained. My supposed mental decline had provided perfect cover. Every legitimate complaint became evidence of paranoia. Every accurate accusation was dismissed as confusion. Danny had turned my credibility into his greatest weapon against me. But as I organized the evidence into a comprehensive file, a different plan began forming. The police could arrest Danny anytime. I had enough evidence to convict him 10 times over. But arrests were temporary. Prison sentences eventually ended. What Danny had done to me went beyond theft. He destroyed my reputation, poisoned my family relationships, and planned to strip away my autonomy entirely. Simple criminal justice wasn't enough for that level of betrayal. I wanted complete destruction, social exile, financial ruin, the kind of public humiliation that would follow him for the rest of his life. And I knew exactly how to deliver it. They had no idea what was coming. Boxing Day morning brought the revelation that would seal Danny's fate forever. I'd been methodically reviewing the remaining footage when I discovered something that made my hands shake with rage, not from age or illness, but from the sheer audacity of what my son had planned. December 23rd, 3 p.m. While I'd been grocery shopping for a Christmas dinner that would never happen, Danny had hosted his most important meeting yet. The man in the expensive suit had returned, this time carrying a thick folder of legal documents. But this wasn't just another theft planning session. This was a finale to Danny's long game. The guardianship petition is ready for filing, the lawyer was saying as they settled in the basement. Once your father signs a power of attorney tomorrow, we can move immediately on the competency hearing. And you're certain the evaluation will support our position? Danny's voice carried nervous excitement. Dr. Morrison has already prepared the psychiatric assessment. Severe cognitive decline, inability to manage finances, danger to himself if left unsupervised. The court will have no choice but to grant emergency guardianship. My blood turned to ice. Danny wasn't just planning to steal my possessions. He was orchestrating a complete legal takeover of my life. The power of attorney document he'd mentioned was presumably hidden somewhere in my house, waiting for the right moment to present it as something I'd willingly signed. Once I have guardianship, how quickly can we liquidate assets? Danny asked with the casual tone of someone discussing a business transaction. The house alone is worth $400,000. Investment portfolio shows roughly $250,000. We can have everything converted to cash within 60 days of the court order. They were discussing the systematic destruction of everything Margaret and I had built together. Our home, our savings, our retirement security, all transformed into funding for Danny's criminal enterprise and this corrupt lawyer's fees. But the worst was yet to come. The beautiful part, the lawyer continued with obvious satisfaction, is that once he's declared incompetent, anything he says about our arrangement becomes the ravings of a mentally ill man. Even if he figures out what happened, no one will believe him. Danny's laughter was cold, calculating, completely devoid of any filial affection. The old fool actually thinks I'm helping him. He'll probably thank me for taking care of everything right up until we put him in the cheapest nursing home we can find. Memory care facilities are expensive, the lawyer warned. Even the basic ones run $3,000 monthly. Then we'll find something cheaper. Or better yet, state-funded. Once his assets are gone, he becomes the government's problem. I paused the recording, my chest tight with disbelief. This wasn't just theft or fraud. This was a methodical plan to destroy my life, steal my legacy, and abandon me to die alone in whatever institution would accept a penniless old man. The Christmas Eve meeting suddenly made perfect sense. While I sat alone in my house, hurt by my family's rejection, Danny had been hosting the final coordination session for his legal assault on my independence. Tomorrow's timing is crucial, I heard the lawyer explaining. Christmas Day. Everyone's emotional and distracted. Perfect time to get him to sign documents he won't read carefully. I'll tell him it's something simple. Insurance paperwork, medical forms. He'd trust me completely. Danny's plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Present the power of attorney as routine paperwork, while I was emotionally vulnerable from Christmas isolation. Once signed, Dr. Morrison's fraudulent evaluation will provide legal justification for emergency guardianship. Within weeks, I'd be institutionalized and financially destroyed. But Danny had made one critical error in his planning. He'd underestimated his father's intelligence and overestimated his own cleverness. At 9:30 a.m. on Boxing Day, I made 2 phone calls that would destroy Danny's life as thoroughly as he'd planned to destroy mine. First, Detective Sarah Martinez at the local police department. I need to report multiple felonies involving elder abuse, identity theft, and planned guardianship fraud. Second, Linda Chun at Adult Protective Services. I'm a senior citizen whose son is attempting to have me fraudulently declare incompetent while stealing my assets. Both agencies responded with immediate concern and professional urgency. Elder abuse cases, especially those involving legal manipulation, triggered rapid response protocols. They'd seen this pattern before. Adult children systematically destroying their parents' lives for financial gain. We'll need all the evidence you mentioned, Detective Martinez explained. Video footage, audio recordings, financial documents showing unauthorized transactions. I have everything organized and ready for review, I replied, feeling genuine satisfaction for the first time in months. The coordinated response was swift and devastating. At 11:45 a.m., I watched through my security cameras as 3 police cars and an Adult Protective Services van arrived at my house simultaneously. Danny's panic was immediate and absolute. I could see him through the basement windows, frantically shoving documents into bags, making desperate phone calls, realizing too late that his careful plan was collapsing. When the officers knocked on my front door, I answered with the dignity and competence of a man fully in control of his faculties. Mr. Hartwell, we're here about your reports of elder abuse and fraud. Please come in. I have extensive documentation of everything my son has done. The look on Danny's face when he emerged from the basement to find police in my living room was worth 10 months of humiliation and betrayal. Pure terror mixed with dawning comprehension that his father had outmaneuvered him completely. Dad, what's going on? Why are the police here? I smiled at him with cold satisfaction. They're here because I was still there when the police came. Danny, I've been here all along, watching everything. The police moved through my house with methodical precision, following the detailed roadmap I provided. Every piece of evidence was exactly where I told them it would be. Danny's operation had been so systematic that documenting became almost mundane. Forged power of attorney documents, hidden behind the water heater. I directed Officer Rodriguez toward the basement. Financial records showing unauthorized account access inside the filing cabinet he thought I'd forgotten about. Danny stood in my living room like a deer caught in headlights, his usual arrogance replaced by stuttering confusion. Dad, I don't understand what you're telling them. You're confused again, mixing up. I'm not confused, Danny. My voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd spent 10 months gathering unassailable evidence. I know exactly what you've been doing from my basement. Every theft, every forgery, every lie you've told about my mental state. Detective Martinez emerged from the basement, carrying a box of documents and electronic devices. Mr. Hartwell's information was completely accurate. We found everything he described, plus additional evidence of ongoing criminal enterprise. The moment Danny realized his manipulation tactics wouldn't work, that I wasn't the confused old man he'd been portraying to everyone, his panic transformed into something uglier, desperate anger, directed at the father who dared to fight back. You don't know what you're doing, he snarled, dropping all pretense of concern. You think you're so smart, but you're nothing without me. Nothing. Actually, I replied calmly, I'm discovering I'm quite capable without you stealing from me. The arrest happened with dramatic timing that couldn't have been scripted better. At 12:30 p.m., just as Danny was being read his rights, Amber arrived with two of his criminal associates for what they thought would be another routine business meeting. Instead, they walked into a crime scene crawling with police officers. Amber's face went white when she saw Danny in handcuffs. "What's happening?" "Danny, what did you do?" "Your boyfriend is operating a criminal enterprise from this property," Detective Martinez explained. "We'll need to speak with all of you about your involvement." I watched from my front window as Amber and the associates were separated for questioning. The woman who'd helped catalog my possessions for theft, who discussed my finances with clinical detachment, suddenly looked very young and very scared. But my masterpiece wasn't the arrest. It was the social destruction that followed. At 1:15 p.m., I sent a carefully crafted group text to every family member who participated in Danny's campaign against my credibility. The message included 3 video clips. Danny discussing the old fool with his lawyer, audio of him planning my institutionalization, and security footage of him systematically stealing Margaret's jewelry. The response was immediate and devastating. Carol called within minutes, her voice thick with tears and horror. "Frank, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. We thought we were helping." "You thought you were helping by deciding I was mentally incompetent without consulting a single medical professional?" I asked quietly. "Danny showed us such concern. He seemed so worried about you. The stories he told about your behavior, your memory." "All lies, Carol. Every single story was fabricated to isolate me from family support while he destroyed my life." Tommy's text came next. "Uncle Frank, I'm horrified. I gave Danny $8,000, believing it was for your medical expenses. I feel sick." One by one, family members reached out with shocked apologies and growing understanding of how completely they'd been manipulated. The concerned relatives who planned my social exile now faced the humiliating reality that they'd been accomplices in elder abuse. But the most satisfying moment came when Amber returned to collect her belongings. I was sitting on my front porch, enjoying the crisp December air and the unusual quiet of my house, when she approached with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Hartwell, I wanted to apologize. I never meant for things to go so far." "You never meant to get caught," I corrected. "There's a difference. Danny said you had plenty of money, that you wouldn't miss small things. He made it sound like you were already planning to give him everything anyway. And you believe that justified stealing my wife's jewelry, my father's watches, items with decades of family history?" Amber looked genuinely ashamed, which was more than Danny had managed during his arrest. "I know we can't undo what we did, but if there's anything I can do to make this right, you can testify truthfully when this goes to trial," I said simply. By New Year's Eve, my house felt like my own again. The locks had been changed, a restraining order filed, and every trace of Danny's presence removed from the basement. The stolen items that police recovered sat in evidence bags, but seeing them again felt like recovering pieces of my soul. The financial damage was significant but not devastating. My retirement security remained intact, and insurance would cover much of the theft. More importantly, my reputation had been restored among family members who now understood the scope of Danny's deception. On New Year's morning, I sat in Margaret's chair with my coffee, reading news coverage of Danny's arrest. "Local man charged with elder abuse in elaborate fraud scheme," the headline read. The article detailed his criminal enterprise, the forged documents, and the systematic manipulation of family members. But I wasn't celebrating Danny's destruction. I was mourning the son I'd raised, who'd chosen to become the kind of man who could look his father in the eye and plan his complete ruin. Justice had been served completely and publicly, but the price of that justice was learning that blood relationships mean nothing when measured against greed and entitlement. As I planned my new life, smaller family gatherings, careful trust, but genuine relationships with people who'd earned it, I reflected on a hard truth. Sometimes the people who take family for granted learn too late that family can fight back. And sometimes that lesson cost them everything. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your opinions of this story in the comments. To listen to more stories, click on one of the boxes showing on your screen. Thank you for watching.